From Social Prosperity Partners, this is Community Catalysts. Welcome to Community Catalysts, the podcast that examines the qualities of community leadership and the many paths and forms it can take. I'm your host, Matt Lehrman. Today's episode concludes my 7-part conversation with Otis White, the now retired founder of Civic Strategies, an Atlanta-based company. Whether or not you've listened to the previous segments, I believe you'll come away from this discussion with a deep appreciation for what I've recognized as Otis's practical idealism, a profound love for urban living, the importance of active civic engagement, and a conviction shaped by his decades of hands-on experience in public involvement and urban strategic planning that optimism about the future of American society is well-founded. Then, you'll hear Otis's insightful conversation with Kathy Gannon, who was then a commissioner in DeKalb County, Georgia. Together, they discuss the transformation of a complex 5-way intersection into a functional traffic circle. This interview is one of over 30 that Otis conducted between 2011 and 2015 in partnership with the Georgia Municipal Association for a podcast series that was called Civic Strategies, and it featured a diverse range of community leaders sharing the hard-earned lessons from their work to improve their communities. His archive of interviews offers a wealth of inspiration and practical advice, and I am really grateful to Otis for the privilege of sharing them here as a resource for today's emerging community leaders. Look for the republication of those episodes to continue here monthly. But first, let's pick up the conversation with Otis White. I asked him, how do you measure success in community decision-making?
Well, we want to learn. People want to learn things. So, to be successful, cities need to create opportunities, not just for children, but for adults to learn things. We want to be around other people. We want to meet one another. We want to have fun sometimes. We also want to work. So, there's just a number of things. You can sort of put them into like a 5 or 6 buckets of things that make cities successful. And they work both at the city level and at the neighborhood level. So asking, is it fun to be in this neighborhood? Is it a safe neighborhood? Is it a clean neighborhood? Is it a neighborhood that looks after children and older people?
It would also be, do I feel secure in my place? Do I feel that my family is secure? Do I feel like I have opportunity, that I'm in control of my own destiny? That what else would you put on that?
One of the constant problems of cities is the fear that they're losing their young people. And so you want to have a city that keeps its young people, because we want our children to stay in our city if we can, or at least we want the opportunity for them to stay in our city. And there's nothing sadder than a city of old people.
And there are societies around the world where the demographic shifts are potentially collapsing their societies. That's a big issue in Japan right now.
Yeah. I'm not sure it's due to immigration as much as it is to just decisions about childbirth. But it's not a happy play. I often tell my wife that there's nothing better than going in the backyard and hearing children in the neighborhood playing. And there is something so comforting about that. And I'd hate to live in a place where I couldn't hear children's voices. And they're not my children. They're somebody else's children. But that tells you, that's about the future. You want to feel good about the future. And so communities, that's a important part of communities.
What, that communities exist?
That people feel like their community has a future. It's not just, it'll all be over the moment I die. They want to believe that, what they contribute will lead on to something good after they're gone. And that's the part of making a contribution. And by the way, I guess we don't say this enough. The very best people you will ever be around are those people who are working to make their neighborhoods and their cities better. They're the best motivated, best people, most interesting. Yeah. It's been a real privilege for me to know and work alongside some of these people over the years. And I'm just amazed at how much goodwill and heart these people have put into their work, for which they are paid nothing.
It seems like there should be a skill set or a lesson for elected officials and for staff at cities and towns as well, for them to be more mindful and more purposeful about how to receive the efforts of people in their community who are trying to make their communities better.
I think the most undervalued critical resource in cities is volunteerism. We don't appreciate the work of volunteers. And that goes from people who chair the Chamber of Commerce all the way down to the people who work in neighborhood associations. We don't put nearly enough emphasis on what they do or try to increase their numbers enough. So that's why I always thought Decatur, Georgia was the happiest place I'd ever been, because they actually understood the value of people who are paid nothing except, the accomplishment of building a better city and a better neighborhood. And they knew how to get those folks out.
Otis, there's a famous Winston Churchill quote that says, "Democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others." And I'm wondering, do you accept that as an act of faith, or in your practice, did you have any occasion to study and work with community decision-making in other countries, in other forms of decision-making?
Well, America is a big and diverse country, and so there was plenty for me to deal with here. And so I sometimes barely understood America, so I wasn't gonna take my act on the road. I have met with people from other countries, and all I could do is just say, "Here's how it works here."
But that said, you're a big fan of the messiness and chaos and natural division and tension that exists in community decision-making. You don't shy away from that. You actually see that as a virtue of our style of government.
Yeah, I think my old friend John Abercrombie said, the fact that people are angry and upset just tells you they care. And there's something to be said for just people who care.
Otis, we live in a time of incredible division and anger and disconnection. What gives you hope for the future?
Well, I majored in history a long time ago in college, and I've read a lot of history since then. And I know we have faced terrible problems, and we're not a perfect country by any means. But I always liked what Barack Obama used to say, that our effort was to create a more perfect union. Not a perfect union, a more perfect union. And so I'm confident we can do it. We've done it in the past. I'm confident we can do it again. Compared to the Civil War, these are easy times to live in. I even think back to the 1970s when I first got interested in cities, and cities were at a really low. I was in New York. Cities were at a really low point in 1973 and 74, and they're not anymore. We figured out how to bring them back. We dramatically lowered crime in this country from the 1990s until the early 2010s. We can do it again. There's almost no problem, I'm convinced, that we can't deal with if we are willing to try our best at coming up with the right answers and framing the questions the right way and involving people in the right way. So, yeah, I think we know how to do it. So we'll do it.
if we make people feel connected, respected, and heard.
Yeah, exactly.
Otis, we've been talking for almost an hour and a half now. Is there anything that I have not asked you about that you put in your notes that you want to make sure that we talk about here?
There is one little thing that happened to me in my consulting work that showed me that when you do planning work, you sometimes don't know what big things come out of little ideas. And this was in Rome, Georgia. And I was working with the Chamber of Commerce and others in the community in sort of a visioning project there. And we were convening people all over the Rome area, asking them what they wanted. And one thing they said was that they wanted something to do in the community. They wanted more wholesome, fun, family things to do. And they just didn't feel like they had that. And so I remember as I was writing the final plan, I think I put in as an example of the kind of entertainment venue that people were saying over and over again, we need this, we don't have it, we really need something. I think I said something like a minor league baseball park. And somehow, just as that illustration of a much bigger idea, somebody looked at it and said, we need to get a minor league baseball park here. To make a long story short, Rome, Georgia now has the single-A affiliate of the Rome Braves. And I had forgotten that I had anything to do with this, except that the president of the Chamber of Commerce years later said, would you like to go see the stadium you built? And it was just a remarkable example of how raising people's ambitions can have consequences way beyond what you think they will be. That's not the only example, except it's the only one I've actually gone and sat in the luxury box in. Once you raise the sights of people, they will do things far beyond what you imagined when you started out. And you don't need to be resistant of what they bring. You need to be supportive of it.
One of the most exciting moments that I see when I lead visioning projects, and inevitably it happens, people have come because the city or the town has hosted this. And then you see strangers talking to each other and brainstorming together. And inevitably you see this happen where someone says, you've got an interesting idea about that. And I have some experience, in this kind of thing. Let's get together for coffee next week and talk about it. And all of a sudden, the power shifts. And it's no longer the city process controlling it. It is returned to the residents to own the future of their own communities, because there is nothing more powerful than people who have an idea, are passionate about it, and are willing to work to develop that and bring other people into that effort.
This is exactly why I say the most neglected resource in cities is volunteerism. We don't bring people into the work of communities nearly as much as we should. And the difference is between a vending machine and a barn raising. You put your quarter in, you want your soft drink, and if you don't get it, you just kick the vending machine. And that's the approach we have about government. Wait a minute, I paid my taxes. They didn't pick up my garbage. Well, let me go kick the vending machine. The smarter communities are about barn raising. They're about, we'll do our part, but we need the neighborhood associations to do some things, and we need church groups to do some things, and we need civic organizations to come together and do things. We need the nonprofits to do things. We need the foundations to help us with things. We need these arts groups to help us as well. And let's all work together. And they will accomplish, they will accomplish so much more than the vending machine approach can ever even imagine. And it's for the very reason you talked about, which is once people get together and start talking about an idea, it's going to go in a direction that you can't anticipate. And 99 out of 100 times, a better direction.
The vending machine metaphor is interesting. In the public comments section before a town council meeting, that sometimes gets reflected by someone coming up and saying, I paid my taxes and I demand this. I demand that you vote this way. If you ever want my vote or whatever. And that is a demanding approach to it as opposed to a contributing approach to bettering one's community. I love the way that you've phrased that.
Well, Matt, it's been a delight.
Otis White, thank you for sharing your insights, your expertise, and especially for sharing this wonderful learning resource with all of us. I'm terribly grateful to you.
Well, my delight.
Hello and welcome to Civic Strategies, a podcast about cities and their leaders produced in cooperation with the Georgia Municipal Association. I'm Otis White. On our show today is Kathy Gannon, a commissioner in DeKalb County, Georgia, a close-in suburb of Atlanta and home of Emory University. I mention Emory because it's important to what you're about to hear. A little less than 2 years ago, a change was made at the entrance to the university. In the scheme of things, it didn't seem like a big change. It involved improvements to a 5-way intersection and some streetscaping along a small row of stores and restaurants called Emory Village. But it has worked far better than most people expected. It improved the look of the college entrance, but more important, it began to draw crowds of people on foot. A shopping area that had attracted few people suddenly saw students, professors, and neighborhood residents walking to Emory Village to eat or shop. And there were two other things about this small improvement that are worth noting. First, it involved an unusual change in the intersection. Out went the traffic lights, and in came a traffic circle or roundabout. These things are common in England and other countries, but fairly unusual in the U.S. And something else. The improvements came out of a collaboration that involved the county government, the university, and landowners in Emory Village. So there you have it. An unusual idea advanced by an unusual collaboration that worked extraordinarily well. Behind all of this was Commissioner Gannon, who represents the western part of DeKalb County, including the Emory area. She's been on the commission since 2005 and has been active in state and national county government associations. She's been an advocate for the environment, for children and senior citizens, and for historic preservation. So with that introduction, welcome, Commissioner Gannon.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Otis. Glad to be here.
To begin, can you explain to people who've never seen one what a roundabout is and how it works?
Well, it's like you said, an interesting concept that they use in Europe a lot. And basically, it's a big circle, a traffic circle, where usually more than 4 roads converse together. And as the cars approach this circle, there is a unique sort of give and take so that cars can flow into the traffic and keep going. And the idea is that it just is a slow, safe flow of traffic.
Besides the roundabout, which is the most obvious part of it, there were other changes that were made to the area. What were they?
One was, they call it a road diet, which is a traffic calming device where they took a 4-lane road and used that same space, but brought it down to 3 lanes, 1 in each direction, and then a turn lane in the middle. And they used the extra roadway, if you will, for sidewalk and bike lane.
There seems to be a big increase in people walking to Emory Village from the campus and elsewhere. Now, why have these improvements made such a difference?
The improvements were designed to make the place, Emory Village, more walkable. And that is the genesis of the idea for why we push so hard to do that. You have a unique situation there with university students trying to cross, as you said, what is a 5-corner intersection where no one followed the lights at all or the crosswalks. They used to tell us, the traffic engineers would tell us this was a unique self-guided intersection. Everybody just sort of looked after everybody else when going through it because it was very dangerous. And now it's been made safe. So it's walkable.
Were you at all surprised by how well this worked?
Actually, I wasn't. Now, our traffic engineers and others kept telling us over and over again, this is not going to work. There were a lot of people in the community that were very, very skeptical.
Tell me about the collaboration, because that was really what was behind the improvements, and it involved the university, the county government, the landowners. Were there others who were involved in
The
this?
landowners, as well as the businesses which lease from the landowners, they were involved, and the community. But we started with the basics first, because a lot of things have been tried in Emory Village over the years, and for one reason or the other, the community would pull out because they didn't like what Emory was doing, or Emory would pull out, or the businesses would pull out, and they never quite got it together. And when the community lost their Kroger, their little Kroger store back in the late 90s, it sort of galvanized the community to say, wow, Emory Village was important to us because we had this little store we went to, and we used to meet there.
And it was literally a small grocery store.
A little small grocery store. You always ran into your neighbors there. And when the store went away, everybody all of a sudden realized, wow, what are we going to do now? There's no place for us to go.
How did the collaboration begin then?
We had this big fight, I guess you will, over Save Emory Village. And out of that...
And that was regarding the grocery
store, right? And this little movement of Save Emory Village. And it brought together a lot of people, so we got to do something. So the Civic Association and the university said, let's see if we can't do something. And I was the point person for the community, for the Civic Association. And Betty Willis, who is now a vice president with Emory, she was the point person for Emory. And so I started pulling together the people who would represent this collaborative. So we had a couple representatives from Emory. We brought in a couple people from the neighborhood. We brought in business owners and property owners. And we started meeting over at Everybody's Pizza and talking about how we needed to improve Emory Village. Everyone had a vested interest, but how could we do it? Because there were years and years of distrust, of broken promises, of attempts at other fixes that never worked. And we spent a good couple of months talking through, venting, if you will, all of those old failures. And then at one point I said, okay, we have vented. Now we have to start moving forward. From this point on, we are not going to go back. We are not going to say, but remember when. We are going to keep going forward. And one of the stipulations, and we asked Emory, they're the big gorilla on this corner, we need a commitment from you to participate at the same level as everyone else. And they said, okay. And they did that. And we started meeting about what we could do. And the first thing that came to mind, of course, was that we needed to fix this area. I had been involved in a workshop in Decatur on the issue called Safe Streets. And they brought in a gentleman called Dan Burden. And I heard him speak about safety and walkability and how it creates a place. And this is exactly what we were looking for in Emory Village. And this guy was so interesting in his discussion. I immediately said, this is what we need. And I interviewed him and talked with him and told him about what we were trying to do in Emory Village. And he said he'd love to come and talk with us. So that was the start of this collaboration. We brought him in to talk to our partners and begin an inventory of what was wrong with Emory Village.
Walkability then was the solution to Emory Village.
It was, but it grew out of safety. And what we learned in the process was that this idea of walkability really is how you create a place.
That brings up then the roundabout, which was the solution to how you get students to cross the street safely. And as you mentioned, there was some skepticism.
There was a lot of skepticism, but we knew it was a pretty unsafe thing. One of the things that we started doing was, let's see how bad it is. And we did traffic counts, if you will, only people counts. And we'd stand out on the corner, this group of partners, taking turns, and how many times people would actually use the crosswalk and a crosswalk light. None. Zero. We knew it was really, really unsafe. And so that started it. And this idea of the roundabout was presented to us by Mr. Burden, and there were a lot of skeptics.
So the skeptics were not only the people in the neighborhood, but also the professionals.
That's right. One of the things that we started doing with this collaborative was to plan for Emory Village. And we were very fortunate at that time to have two gentlemen who had been involved with what they called blueprints for successful communities with the Georgia Conservancy and some others, Randall Rourke and Leon Eplin. And they helped us get a little grant from the Urban Land Institute. And they helped us do our first community charrettes for what should happen in Emory Village.
And so did the roundabout come from the charrette and people could then visualize this thing?
The way we started our charrette planning process was I brought Dan Burden back in to be the keynote to kick off the process. And he did a very intriguing visual aid kind of thing, but he did a lot of talking and engaging the audience with questions basically that helped them identify where are your favorite places. When you want to go to some place and you think it looks nice and you can sit there, and everybody started naming places in Europe. It helped people really realize that what we thought was a place that we thought was a place you wanted to go and sit and spend time had a lot of features, but the big one was walkability. And so he said, I want to present to you this concept for your intersection. And he's doing a PowerPoint, and he's got his computer all set up on a screen. And on his screen, he shows this dysfunctional intersection. And then he shows this big round spaceship in the sky flying over, and it comes down and it settles in the middle of the intersection. And then the roads come off of it the way they do now. And he presents to the community this concept of the roundabout. So everyone was very intrigued, but one of the most intrigued people was the president of Emory.
Bill Chase.
Had frequently been to Europe and just gotten back, thought roundabouts were a great idea. So he became an advocate. But then we went into the charrettes. And out of those charrettes, there were like 5 different treatments, if you will, for that intersection. And the roundabout was one. Lots of people had other ideas. So it took a long time for the roundabout to actually become one. And another skeptic was the transportation people that we hired to help do this plan. They were like, it's never going to work. Well, one of the things that Emory did was commit to changing their entrance to fit the roundabout if that was the decision that we came up with. And many of us were promoting the roundabout. And with that kind of physical change, which is very expensive, that made it that much more realistic. So the roundabout just kept rising to the surface until it hit the top.
Well, now, if you were to advise someone from another city who had a similar, they were looking to rejuvenate a place, and at the center of it was a collaboration that you needed to pull together, what advice would you give to people who wanted to do that?
It has to include commitment from the stakeholders. And the stakeholders are those who obviously have some skin in the game. The property owners, the people around it that are going to use it and either support it or not support it. In this case, there were businesses. Everyone had to have a place at the table, and they had to have an equal place at the table. Everyone had to have an equal place at the table. And then you had to have the commitment of someone or some bodies to be the point people. Someone who's going to keep it going, call the meetings, make sure everyone's coming. When Betty and I agreed to sort of get that first group going, we said, yeah, a year. We'll figure it out. We'll spend a year on it. We'll have some solution. And it took 12 years to get the whole thing from start to finish.
So get the right group together.
Get the right group together.
With the right sort of ideas about how to relate to one another. Be extremely patient. And do you need someone to come in from the outside to offer up some ideas, as Mr. Burton?
I think that it was helpful for us. But in part of the charrette process is having technical assistance. So you have to have some transportation planners. You have to have architects, landscape architects. In this case, we were very fortunate with Mr. Rourke's connections to Georgia Tech. We brought in Georgia Tech students to do studios, and they were in transportation or urban planning in those programs. And so they'd take the ideas that people had, and they could translate those ideas into pictures and to refine some of the concepts so they actually made sense. And that made all the difference in the world. Once you can see the ideas generated on a sheet of paper, and this is how it would work, that keeps everyone engaged.
And it also allows for some breakthroughs because something that seems so alien could suddenly be visualized and it didn't seem so threatening. Well, thank you, Commissioner Gannon. My guest has been Kathy Gannon, a commissioner in DeKalb County, Georgia, talking about how to put together successful collaborations to change places. This has been Civic Strategies. I'm Otis White. Thanks for listening.
As always, I share my thanks and appreciation to Otis White for sharing his Civic Strategies podcast with listeners of Community Catalysts. You'll find a link to his resource-rich Civic Strategies website in the program notes. This episode was edited by Nick Living the Dream Tantillo. Our executive producer is John Little. I'm Matt Lehrman of Social Prosperity Partners. Ask me a question, share a comment, or let me know that you have a story to share. You can reach me at 602-688-2724 or matt@socialprosperity.us. I'd love to hear from you. We'll be back soon with another Community Catalyst.